And this was a question we got several weeks ago, which was asking about what do I do when I want to say something, something is something? What is the is in Hebrew? And are there words that can replace it? For example, the pronoun who or the pronoun he. Can I put that in there and it means the same thing? And if not, what do I do? So that's where we're going to start today's class. Today's class may have some big words in it. Um, Starts off with the big one, auxiliaries. But honestly, this is a really important class for all levels. I'm going to say, especially for those at a beginner's level. So for those of you for the last few weeks who have said, Jay, this is too hard for me. First off, there's no such thing when you're learning a language. You learn language, and especially here at Cafe Oleh, as we use it in everyday life, and we're pushing against standards that have been sort of prescribed on all of us, how we learn a language, that may not be true anymore. So whether something's hard or easy for you, maybe you just don't lean in as much on this class. Maybe you lean even more. This is going to be one, especially for those of you at a beginner's level, but especially those of you who are stuck, even at an advanced level, at direct translating, meaning that you are trying to literally translate from one language to another and you get stuck. We've covered this before, and we're going to definitely continue to cover it in the future because it's an important lesson that is going to be exemplified in this. You'll see later in this presentation, we actually covered it when we talked about possession and how do we talk about possessing something, right? And we're going to skip over that because we have some, it's included in this PowerPoint. I'll actually show it to you. But because we covered it in the past, we have a lot to cover in the meantime. So, what do I mean by auxiliaries? Don't get caught up by the words, folks. Sometimes you'll learn these as helper verbs. Sometimes you'll just learn them as articles. But I wrote very specifically what we're talking about here. There is no direct translation of the English a or an, am, are, or is in Hebrew, as well as the verbs has or have and get or become blank ed. Okay, those words are English. I recognize not everyone here's native language is English, but that's course of instruction because Nefesh B'Nefesh, after all, is geared towards a North American audience. However, and it's wonderful we have people from around the world, and thank you all for coming, of course. But most people, right, when they're learning Hebrew, not necessarily most people, especially in our class, our language of instruction is English, right? And when you're trying to translate from one language to another, there's going to be words that don't exist, such as the words a or an. You cannot say an apple and translate that into Hebrew as two individual words. It does not exist. Likewise, the word am, are, and is, which is the present tense of the verb to be, does not exist in Hebrew. Nor do the exact verbs has or have or had and get or become. Okay? These don't exist in the same way they exist in English. Right? And here are all the different things that they illustrate. And again, if these are big words for you, look at the examples in the parentheses. Okay? Indefinite subjects and objects. An apple a day. Okay? Some of you may know that expression, an apple a day. You can't literally translate that into Hebrew using four words. There are no words that literally replace an apple a day. There are words obviously for apple and day, but an and a don't exist. What do we do? Okay. The verb to be in the present tense, am glad, is his. What do we do? Continuous actions, am running, are thinking. You'll notice when I translate a lot of times here, I'll say, for example, he runs, he is running. In Hebrew, that's the exact same thing. Okay. Whereas in other languages, those are two different grammatical constructs. Possession, which is what we've talked about before, it's included in this presentation. So you have one big document that you'll be able to look over once this lesson is uploaded to YouTube in the next day or two. I have a dog. In Hebrew, you will not say, I have a dog, because there is no verb to have. What do we do? Or urgency, I have to work. We do not have that same usage of the verb to have, like in I have a dog and I have to work, or the perfect tense. I have been working for the past hour. Okay. How do we do all that in Hebrew? Or how to get angry or to become tired? right? We have words for angry and tired, but we don't have words for to get and become in the same way. So the bad news is we don't have direct translations of those words. The good news is, however, we can communicate every single one of those examples I just gave using a select group of words, and some of which translate easily from English, some of them don't. But the point is, every single one of these, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven things we can say in Hebrew, just not a direct translation. Okay. And that's going to show up later in our presentation and something I've said multiple times. One of the many beauties of languages is that we all speak different languages. And that also means that there's different constructs and there's different grammar and there's different words. So no one is at the center of the universe here. Not English speakers, not Hebrew speakers, nor any other language. Okay. So that you are accustomed to it in your native language does not mean or presume that another language does the same, and vice versa. Okay? So let's start with the question that I got asked. Actually, we're going to get to am, are, and is second, but this is a big one. It actually is included here. How do we replace these words in Hebrew? A and an, am, are, and is. Okay, those of you who aren't familiar with these words, a or an is the indefinite in English, right? An apple, an idea, a quarter, right? The only difference is the word that follows it starting with a vowel or not. Okay, and am, are, is the conjugation of the verb to be in the future in the present tense. I am, you are, he is, she is, it is, we are, you are, they are. Okay, that's all what we're talking about here. Five words that make up a lot of what we say in English, but in Hebrew, we don't have these actual words. So how do we express what we're talking about here? Number one, look and communicate for context. I talk about context a lot because I know you all. One of the reasons we teach the way we do here is because you have busy lives to lead. You need to pay bills. You need to keep up with the news. You need to know the weather forecast. You need to know the traffic forecast, right? And sometimes reading for context may seem like it takes too long, but it's integral to understanding Hebrew. Case in point, two words, right? Two words create three different sentences using an article. We're going to use the article ha. Ha as a prefix is the definite article, right? The definite article is a fancy term. Often it is the equivalent in English of the. It's not always, but it most of the time is the equivalent of the. Look at not only three different ways to use the two words and the definite article ha, but look at what it creates in its existence or in its absence. Those are big words. Again, focus on the sample sentences here. Yom gashum. Yom is the word for day. Gashum is the adjective rainy, right? From the word geshem. Gashum, rainy. Yom gashum, a rainy day. There is only one way to read this, folks. Yom gashum, it translates in English to a rainy day. Notice there is no word There's no word in the Hebrew. There's simply yom, day, and gashum, rainy. There is no but it's understood when you translate it back into English. Yom gashum, a rainy day. There is no other way to understand yom gashum in English other than a rainy day. Okay. Now let's look at the next one. If I use the definite article ha at the beginning of the word as the prefix, right? Hayom gashum, right? Hayom gashum. The day is rainy. Now look what happened. The day, Hayom can be translated as both the day and today. It's a particularity in that respect. Gashum. There is no word is in Hebrew in this sentence, and yet it's a complete sentence, and I know to translate it as Hayom Gashum. The day is rainy. Okay. When the first word in a series like this, the noun, has the definite article ha, and the second word, the adjective, does not, you can understand that as the noun is blank. Look at the bottom of the screen, by the way. I wrote this out and I'm going to write it out again in the next slide, right? The first instance that we saw here, blank, blank, a rainy day. Okay. The second instance, where the first word is modified by the article ha yom gashum. The day is rainy. Again, there is no verb here that indicates is. It is understood in the Hebrew and therefore translated into English as is. Okay? Whether you translate it as the day or today, by the way, as you see in the on the left-hand side. And finally, the last one, Hayom Hagashum. What if both words get the definite article? The rainy day. Okay? Because remember, number one, adjectives follow nouns in Hebrew, and they have to agree with each other in order to be anything but a declarative statement, a declarative sentence, excuse me. So if I want to say the rainy day, not just a rainy day, Yom Gashum, but the rainy day, Hayom HaGashum, the rainy day. Okay? So what do we look at here? If you want to say in Hebrew, in if you want to say in Hebrew, a or an, adjective noun, a rainy day, a blustery day, a stormy day, a good day, right? In Hebrew, it's going to be the Shem etzem. Shem etzem means noun, followed by the toal. I didn't write that here, but it's the you understand what I mean, right? A rainy day. Yom, Shem etzem, noun, gashum, toal, adjective. If I want to say is or are, as in the day is rainy, ha, followed by the noun, and then whatever adjective is after is modifying it without the ha. Ha yom gashum. The day is rainy. And then finally, if I just want to describe the words, and I'm not talking about a or an or is or are, it's ha yom hagashum. Ha, shem etzem noun, ha toal adjective. Okay. On Wednesday's class, by the way, at the top of the hour, I'll answer your questions and talk about Cafe Oleh Conversations, our free class on Wednesday that helps practice. You're going to be practicing this. This may seem rudimentary, but I promise it's important because at a certain point, you're going to get stuck and say, wait a minute, where's the is in this sentence? This is what we're talking about. Now, for those of you at a slightly higher level, but don't worry if you're not, right? If you have complex sentences in Hebrew, for example, this news update that showed up on my screen yesterday, in fact, some not so great news in the last few days, but whatever. And it's a very complex sentence, and I'm going to translate it for you so you understand just how complex this sentence was to begin with, especially in journalism. That's the case. You're going to use the subject pronouns who, he, him, hen to emphasize or clarify connection. What do I mean by that? What were those subject pronouns I just said? He, she, they, and it, right? All of those are third person. All of those are used in English, for example, to connect things. Well, in Hebrew, right, kept saying there is no present tense of the verb to be. There is no is, there is no are, and there is no am. So how do we get around that? We use these subject pronouns when we don't quite when we need some further connection in a sentence. So for example, I'm going to read this in Hebrew and then I'm going to translate it with you together. It says, first off, the reporter's name, Inbar Tweezer, is both the picture and her name at the top. And it says in Hebrew, החוקר צחי חבקין, עד הגנה בתיקי נתניהו, הוא הקצין שחשוד בעבירת שוחד למשפחת הפשע מוסלי, or Musli. Okay, so I put the emphasis under who, right? The only time the word who appears, what is the sentence saying? Achoker, the investigator, Tsachi Chabkin, it's the name of the investigator. Ed Hagana, the defense witness. Ed is a witness. Hagana, defense. Betike Netanyahu, in Netanyahu's three different trials going on right now, right? So the investigator, Tsachi Chabkin, the defense witness in the Netanyahu cases, who הקצין שחשוד. He is the officer that is suspected of bribery for the crime family Museli. Okay? Why is the word who here? Because who means he. I know that sounds, we always get a laugh at that, right? Who, the Hebrew word who, means the English word he, He, right? He is a subject pronoun. He is. He likes. He does. He wants, right? Who in this case is emphasizing the choker and the katzin. It's making that linkage together. And by extension, it's being translated as is. So if I was to translate this all together, it would sound like this. The investigator Tzachi Chabkin, the defense witness for in the Netanyahu cases, is the officer that is accused of the crime of bribery for the Museli crime family, right? I would naturally translate that as is, but in the Hebrew, there is no is. So I use who to emphasize the connection between hachoker tzachi chabkin and hachatzin hachashud, the investigator and the suspected officer, right? I need something to connect them together, and who is that word? He is that word. If I were to translate this literally, the investigator Tzachi Chabkin, defense witness in the Netanyahu cases, he is or he the suspected officer or he is the suspected officer, right? It falls back on the who to make that linkage clearer. Okay, so if one, we read for context, two, we can use this in more complicated sentences and more complex sentences, especially those of you at a more advanced level in Hebrew, right? If we want to add, as you saw here, a clause in the middle to further illustrate who this person is, and back, we can use one of these pronouns. Okay, that's another way that we can do am, are, is, a, am. And now, here's another way. If you want to say, well, wait a minute, Jay, there is a way to say an apple, and I'm sure someone has already said that in the chat or want to say that chat. Wait a minute, Jay, you can say tapuach echad. Well, first off, you can't. Okay, that means one apple. Okay, tapuach echad does not mean an apple; it means one apple. Echad is one, right? That is not the same thing as an apple. Sounds in terms of larger goals of communication, perhaps, but it is not the same thing. One apple, an apple, because actually, one apple is already becoming more definite of a term than an apple. An apple is a random apple at choice. One apple is already singling out a specific apple, not necessarily a specific apple, but it's already indicating me the quantity. It's already whittling down to a definite word. Okay. But let's say I want to throw that out and I want to emphasize the singularity of something, right? I can use the term, for example, yom echad, one day, right? It's not a day, it's yom echad, right? Yom echad ani רוצה לטייל ליפן. One day I want to travel to Japan. Okay, it's one day in general, and however you want to illustrate one day. יש לי יום אחד בשבילך. I have one day for you, right? Lots of different ways we can use one day, but it's indicating we're only talking about a day. Even if I did that whole rant about quantities. We can also use the word eze or ezo. The only difference between those is gender. Eze for masculine words, ezo for feminine words. Eze or ezo usually gets translated as which, but it can also mean a whole bunch of other things depending on the context. For example, eze yom. Depending on how you say eze yom, and you've heard it in both ways on a regular basis here in Israel, and you will if you haven't already, right? It can mean someday or someday or a day. For example, as you see at the bottom, I have a couple sample sentences. Yesh eze yom she'ata panui. Is there a day that you're free? In English, we would say, is there a day that you're free? Or is there some day that you're free? In Hebrew, right, we're going to say, Yesh eze yom she'ata panui. Is there whichever day, or someday, or a day that you are free? That's how we're going to say it. You've probably heard that before. Um, Yeshlo ezo baya iti. He has some problem with me, or he has a problem with me, right? Eze, as much as it means which, we can use in everyday language to indicate a or an, or in this case, some as well. Or the expression eze yom. Anytime I say eze followed by a word, and it's understood through pronunciation or writing, in this case with an exclamation point, it can mean what a day or someday, right? Either way, as you see at the bottom, eze yom hayali, what a day I had, or someday I had. Okay? Either way, you're indicating the singularity of something. And then if you want to use some slang, and I think slang is always important, as you know, we talk a lot about slang here, and I introduce it as much as I can, if not full-on classes with it. You can use the slang word wahed. Wahed, or as I wrote here, wahad in the transliteration, or you're going to say most likely wahad, right? The ch sound. Wahad sounds exactly like echad because it is. It is the Arabic version of the number one. Hebrew is echad, in Arabic wahad, right? And when you say wahad in Hebrew slang, it means one hell of a, or some, right? Wahad yom, hayali wahad yom. I didn't just have a day, I had a hell of a day, right? Because I'm using slang. I'm using non-Hebrew to indicate, and with all the sounds that's included, what the hell, one hell of a day. Okay? All of these indicate a single object. And all of these can be translated into the English a or an. If you are that pressured to translate literally, these are going to be some of your friends. Okay, the number one, achad, the word eze, ezo, which otherwise means which, or the slang term wahad. Wahad you really want to use when something is really over the top bad. You don't just use it in any context. Like I wrote here, one hell of a day, right? That's how you're going to use wahad. It does not conjugate. It's a great term to use, but you got to be confident with it and really only use it when the context is needed. Okay? So, am, are, is, a, an, different ways to get around that problem. Now, I'm going to quickly go through this part because we have already covered this in a whole lesson just on possession, right? Have, has, or had, right? How do we indicate those things in Hebrew, right? Modern Hebrew, there are two primary ways to show direct possessiveness, which we'll unpack in the following slides. We've all gone over this before, but I'm including this in one big lesson because I think it's important. It's important to remember, however, in Hebrew, that the possessor is not the subject of the sentence, which is best illustrated by this mug. I love this mug. It's a great line in general. The center of the universe has been discovered. No, it's not you, right? That is as much about how we create possession in Hebrew and how do we get around the words have, had, or has, as it is the larger sentence, the larger meaning of this class that I started out with, right? Just because this is the way that you speak in your language, in your country of origin, does not mean that Hebrew works the same way and vice versa. No one language is at the center of the universe, nor are any of us at the center of the universe. Things have to change, right? Learning a new language is not just about learning new words, it's also about sometimes learning new grammar. Case point in Hebrew. Okay. So we've gone over this before. I don't want to dwell too much because we have other things to go over today, but it is included here. In the present tense, we use the words yesh, there is, and ein, there is not, right? And then it's followed by the indirect object, li, lecha, lach, lo, la, right? In other words, the word that we're discussing is the object that's being possessed, not the person who possesses it, right? There is to me a dog. In English, there is to me a dog. In Hebrew, yeshli kelev. Yeshli kelev is the equivalent in English of I have a dog, but it translates to there is to me a dog. Because again, there is no verb to have. You cannot literally translate, I have a dog. You have to say, there is to me a dog. Okay. And notice who is the emphasis, who gets the emphasis in each of those examples. In English, I have a dog. I, the possessor, is the subject. In Hebrew, there is to me a dog. The dog is actually the focus of the sentence, not me. Okay? And more specifically, the possession I have over that dog is the emphasis, is the center. Okay? Ein is simply there is not. It's the negation of yesh. Yesh li kelev, I have a dog. Ein li kelev, I don't have a dog. There is no dog to me, or there is not to me a dog. Okay? In past tense and in past and in the future, we use the verb to be, lihiot, and conjugate it the same way that you just saw, but we replace yesh and ein with these. Hayali kelev, hayuli klavim. Look what happens here. And this is something that in my private classes with people, I have to go over many times, even at very advanced levels, because you have to think of two things, gender and plurality all at once, in a way that when you say, I had dogs, you don't, right? I had, you had, we had, she had, they had. It's the same verb in the past tense. In Hebrew, it's not, because haya li kelev, there was to me a dog. Fine. But look, Haya and Kelev here on the bottom left, right? Haya and Kelev are in sync. Haya is past tense singular masculine. Kelev is singular masculine. They have to agree with each other. If I want to pluralize, I had dogs, right? Hayu li klavim. The only thing that stays the same in both of these is li, to me. There was to me a dog. There were to me dogs. Hayu li klavim. Now the verb has to agree with klavim, which is the plural of kelev, right? So dogs. So the verb has to change as well to be plural, from haya to hayu, and kelev to klavim. Okay? Has to be like that. And gender also works like that. If you look on the right-hand side, תהיה לי הזדמנות, יהיו לי הזדמנויות. הזדמנות, opportunity, it's a feminine word. תהיה לי הזדמנות. I will have an opportunity. There will be to me an opportunity. This is the future tense. And because הזדמנות is feminine and singular, so too is the verb, תהיה. The moment it's pluralized, הזדמנויות, opportunities, so is the verb, יהיו לי הזדמנויות. Okay? Another way to illustrate possessiveness is using the preposition shel, either on its own or conjugated for the possessor. Hakelev shel hayeled, right? The dog of the boy, i.e., the dog's boy, the boy's dog, excuse me, the boy's dog, hakelev shel hayeled, or hakelev shelo, right? His dog. Okay, you can use the word shel, meaning of, and then add the correct possessive suffix at the end. Another one we've done before is smichut. We have a whole lesson on this. We've actually done several lessons on smichut. Smichut is the Hebrew term for compound nouns. Half of the Hebrew dictionary, half, is just compound nouns. They comprise that many words where we take two different nouns, put them together, and create a new thing. For example, the classic ones like Beit Sefer, where we take the word bait, house, and Sefer, book, put them together. Beit Sefer is not house of the book, cute as of a translation as it is, it's a school. It's understood through the concept of house of the book, but we translate it as school or schoolhouse. Okay? Same thing here. Mevaker Hamedina, the state comptroller, right? Mevaker is someone who critiques. It's also someone who visits, but it also means someone who critiques. And Medina is the state. So the state critiquer or the critiquer of the state or the commenter of the state or the criticizer of the state comptroller. Okay, that's another way that we can indicate possession in terms of not using has or had. Possessive suffix, I don't want to get into that right now, but these are all there for you to read on your own, as well as what the possessive suffix look like. Right? This is especially for those of you who are at more advanced levels. You're going to need to know these at a certain point. We really only use these in very poetic terms, sometimes also in journalism, but you are going to need to be able to use these and reference them when the more advanced levels you get. Also knowing that they aren't always culturally appropriate, as you also see. Some words we just don't always use. Um, Again, we've gone over this in the past, but I want to include it in talking about have or has. Right? And we do indeed have verbs that get really close to the meaning of to have in Hebrew, as opposed to what we just talked about before about am, are, and is, right? We have very complex verbs like to constitute, to exist, to, and so forth, right? But that's not the same as am, are, and is, just as to acquire, to belong, and to become identified with are similar to have, but they don't mean the exact same thing. Okay. And then how do we replace these words in Hebrew, right? We often learn these as helper verbs because to get is a verb, to become is a verb. But when we place it in front of another verb, then it becomes what we call an auxiliary verb or a helper verb. Okay. Either way, that's what we mean when we say an auxiliary or a helper verb. By the way, to have also does that. To have loved and lost, right? In Hebrew, we'll talk about that a little bit more on Wednesday, how we get around that. Okay. How do we replace these words in Hebrew? To get or to become slash ed. To get appointed, to become married, to get promoted, to become um, tired, right? You've heard these before. And how do I know you've heard these before? Because do you remember this diagram? We looked at it a few weeks ago when we talked about passive voice, and we've looked at it many a time in talking about verbs, right? This is called the binyanim, the 7 different forms that verbs take, and it turns into a nice menorah, right? It's a great and important diagram that we're not going to get through all today because we've done it a lot in the past. But as you see, 3 active branches and 3 passive branches. That means in terms of voice. And in the middle, we have binyan hitpa'el, and it says here reflexive. And as I wrote here, the verb form hitpa'el is more than just reflexive and reciprocal, right? Reflexive means to do something to yourself, like lehitkalech, to take a shower, lehistapel, to comb your hair, and so forth. Versus reciprocal, Lihit katev, to do something with one another, in this case, to correspond, right? Reciprocal is to do something with one another. Lihit kasher, to get in touch with, right? It's better to think of hitpael as another big word, intransitive. Intransitive verbs are verbs that don't need an object to make sense. Okay, they don't. And they correspond to the English, among many things, to get or become something, right? So, for example, the verb lehit kadem, right? I gave you 2 examples here. Lehit kadem means to get advanced or to become advanced. Lehishtaper, to get improved or to become improved. Um, any of the verbs in hitpael, almost all of them, can be translated as to get or to be or become. It doesn't mean that if it starts with to be, it's necessarily passive, right? Instead, it's intransitive. It doesn't need an object to make sense. It is the equivalent in English of to get or become something. Okay? I know that's a lot. That's a lot of grammar all at once, but I wanted to condense it as much as I could so that you can see, right, that there are ways to get around every single one of these, what seems to be an obstacle, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you can all do in Hebrew. Okay. The ones, for example, urgency and the perfect tense, we're going to talk about on Wednesday's class. So if you join us for Cafe Oleh conversations, or even if you don't, I highly recommend that you already register for it because no later than 24 hours in advance, we'll send out a reminder with the homework for that class and the preparation for it. So it'll include some conversation prompts. It'll include some other opportunities for extra work for the week other than what you saw here today. Okay, I want to pause here and take some questions because I see we have a bunch in the Q&A. If you wrote to me in the chat, remember I'm only looking at the Q&A. I'll be reviewing the chat tomorrow after class, but Q&A is where I'm going to be answering questions for today so far. A rainy day. If it's a super rainy day, we might say in English, one rainy day, right? What did you just learn just now? And I like that you preempted exactly what I taught today, right? I taught you Yom Gashum, and then I taught you how to say one hell of a day. Ze wachad Yom Gashum. Or, not using slang, Eze Yom Gashum. What a rainy day. Some rainy day, right? You can combine everything together we just learned and you put it together. Eze Yom Gashum Ayom. What a rainy day today, right? Or Eze Yom Gashum. Some rainy day. Okay, that's how you're going to say the equivalent of that's been one rainy day. Great question. Okay, more in the Q&A. How would you say sunny day? I will let you look that up in the dictionary. How do we say today is a rainy day? How do you say it? Right? You have all the words here how to say it. Right? How are you going to say today is a rainy day? First off, in Hebrew, you don't really need to say it, right? You could say the day is rainy. That's more than all right. It's the same idea. Today is rainy. If you want to say today is a rainy day, a little bit repetitive, but go for it. Hayom Yom Gashum. Today is a rainy day, right? That is again is implied, just like it is here. Hayom Yom Gashum, right? Anything after that word with the definite article, that is implied here in that little space. Okay. How to say one of these days is in one of these days I will call her. Yom Echad. One day I will call her. Again, not putting anyone on the spot here, but just because the expression exists in your language doesn't mean it needs to have literally exist in another language. So one of these days can also be, by the way, said in English, one day I will call her. One of these days, right, means the exact same thing. There's no difference lost or gained by the extra words here. So same thing here. Yom echad. Yes, you could say the whole long thing, but honestly, yom echad. I've always wondered about the oral connection, audio connection, or homophonic connection between yesh and yes and ein and ain't. Pure coincidence? Pure coincidence. Yesh does get translated into Hebrew as yes. We use it like that all the time. You can reply in the affirmative yesh. And it doesn't mean there is, it means yesh. There, yes. Awesome. Great. Right? And ain and ain't sound very similar, right? Ain't is a contraction going back to several centuries of English. Ain't is much closer to isn't than ain is, but they both have very similar meanings and sounds. Pure coincidence. Can you just say yesh yom echad ata panui? No, no. No. First off, even not even looking at it, that does not sound like Hebrew. Um, right? What did I write here? First off, you're missing something. If you want to say yesh yom echad she ata panui, don't ever forget she. If we talked about ha today, she is your friend of all times. She is the article. It is a incredibly important prefix you probably are underusing. She means that or which. So first off, in the sentence, yesh yom echad she'ata panui. Your she is missing there. Zoom user. Um, Yesh yom echad she'ata panui. Yes, you can say, is there a day that you are free? Sure. There's a difference between what you think is unnecessary and what you're going to hear in Israel. And what you're going to hear in Israel, yesh eze yom she'ata panui. Is there some day that you're free? Just like you would say that in English. Is there some day that you're free? You're going to hear that word eze being used to indicate a single object more often than you think. And again, just because it doesn't translate literally into English neatly and conveniently doesn't mean you should avoid it. Lean into it. Lean into the discomfort. You're going to hear it. If you don't want to use it, that's one thing, but you are going to hear it, meaning you do need to understand it. Lahafoch, can that mean to become? No. Lahafoch means to turn. So yes, it means to become in the sense of I turn into something or that turns into something. But lahafoch means to turn to or to turn into. We can translate that. Can we diagram as a Hebrew sentence like English? Absolutely. We've done that in the past. We have a whole lesson on word order that we've done. YouTube. Would you ever add the word mamash to make this more intense? Yes, mamash simply means very, just like the word me'od, very. Okay, mamash, me'od, very. So you can add in front of any adjective the word mamash. Yom mamash gashum, or yom gashum me'od, a very rainy day, which it happened to be here in Israel. Can you say another person asking about Eze being dropped from Yesh Eze Yom Shata Panui? I already answered that. Okay. How do you say it is raining? Yored Geshem. Okay. Yored Geshem. Yored is the verb laredet, to fall, to come down. Geshem, rain. Yored Geshem. It's raining. How to say to improve myself in contrast to improve themselves? You're going to use two different, you're just going to use the different declension of etzem. Atzmi is myself, atzmam, themselves. You're talking about to improve versus to get improved. Those are the different verbs. To improve is lishaper, and to get or become or to be improved, lihishtaper. For example, ani mishaper et ha'ivrit sheli. I improve my Hebrew. Versus, which is an awkward sentence, or the more common thing you're going to say, ha'ivrit sheli mishtaperet. My Hebrew gets improved or is improving. Okay, that's the difference of those two verbs, transitive and intransitive. Mishtaper is intransitive. What does eze yofi mean? Great question, right? I told you you're going to hear this word eze a lot. Lean into the word, folks. I know it feels discomforting. It's uncomfortable as two of you ask, can I not use it? Lean into it. Eze yofi, a classic expression in Hebrew, literally means which beauty, but it does not mean which beauty. It means some beauty or what, how wonderful is a better way to translate it. Eze yofi, how great it is, right? Eze yofi. When we make a blessing on the Mediterranean, we say Hayam Hagadol. Why the double positive article? I don't know what you mean double positive article. Hayam Hagadol is the old name for the Mediterranean in Hebrew, literally the big sea, because that's what it is. Hayam Hagadol. If the noun has ha and you're using it as one unit, the big sea, remember what I just showed you, folks? In these examples, where is the big C? Right? It's the third one. The rainy day. Hayam Hagadol. Both words need the ha to indicate it's one idea. The big sea, the rainy day. Okay, hayam hakadol, the big day. Okay, all right, just looking one more questions. Okay, with that, first off, toda rabba, thank you all for joining. This class will be up on YouTube in the next day or two with that presentation. If you're joining us on Wednesday and you have not yet signed up for Cafe Oleh Conversations, please do so now. Please do so actually immediately as this class ends. The link is already in the chat. It's always in your reminders. It's also on the YouTube channel. It's also, of course, on the Nefesh B'Nefesh channel and website, so you can always sign up for it. But if you would like to join, we're going to be talking about more of those examples in Wednesday and actually practicing them. So the sooner you sign up, the easier it'll be to participate on Wednesday. Next week's class, we are going back to one of our regular topics that we do every at least once a month, every once a month and a half or so, which is how to read the news at any level. We used to call that media literacy. Now I'm being much more blunt about it. How to read the news at any level. Okay. An incredibly important um, tool and necessity you must have in Israel is how to keep up with the news at any proficiency level. We'll talk about the reasons why. We've talked about it before. We're going to pick a article at random, and or we're going to look at a news outlet and understand what to look for. What are the context clues? With what Hebrew we have, how can we understand what's going on? Okay, that's next week's Monday's class. Wednesday's class, we're going to dive deeper into how to use these articles and auxiliaries in Hebrew to understand for context. You're going to practice making sentences. You're going to practice speaking with each other using the words that we went over today. I'm going to add a little bit more as well. Until either class, Wednesday or Monday, toda rabba. Thank you all for joining, and lehitrot. See you all very soon.